What happens when a quiet detail buried deep inside official paperwork suddenly changes everything? When something described as a simple, routine inspection quietly becomes the moment that shifts the entire balance. When tensions between the past and the present rise to a level no one expected. And when Chris Marek, long seen as the calm, steady presence, unexpectedly steps forward into a moment that could redefine everything. Because this was never just about permits. It was never just about construction. And it was never just about Roloff Farms. This is about something deeper. About control. About legacy. About history that refuses to stay in the past. For years, Roloff Farms has carried emotional weight far beyond the land itself. Every decision tied to it has carried meaning. Every change has carried consequences. But now, according to growing fan discussion and newly noticed details, one unexpected loophole may have quietly shifted the dynamic between Matt Roloff, Amy Roloff, and Chris Marek. And if that shift is real, it could change far more than anyone anticipated. Because sometimes, the biggest turning points don't happen loudly. They happen quietly, hidden in plain sight. And once discovered, nothing stays the same. Stay with us, because this update may change everything. For nearly 2 decades, fans of Little People, Big World have watched the Roloff family navigate some of life's most emotional and complicated chapters. The farm wasn't just a filming location. It was the heart of everything. It represented family unity, shared dreams, and years of tireless effort. At the center of it all stood Matt Roloff, the visionary whose imagination transformed open land into one of the most recognizable properties in reality television. Every structure, every project, every expansion carried his signature determination. He wasn't just maintaining a farm. He was building a legacy. But that legacy has never existed without emotional complexity. Amy Roloff, who once shared ownership and decision-making authority, remained deeply connected to the land long after major transitions reshaped the family dynamic. Her history with the farm isn't just legal. It's personal. Every corner carries memories of raising children, celebrating milestones, and overcoming challenges. And standing beside her today is Chris Marek, someone who, for years, stayed respectfully in the background. Many fans initially viewed Chris as neutral, supportive, calm, someone who preferred stability over conflict. But recent developments suggest his role may have quietly evolved into something far more significant. Because what began as routine progress soon became something else entirely. Construction updates that once appeared regularly began slowing down. Visible activity became less consistent. Fans who followed every development closely started noticing the silence. And when silence replaces momentum, questions naturally follow. Behind that silence, whispers began to spread. Some reports suggested inspection concerns had surfaced, routine on the surface, but potentially serious depending on timing and technical details. Others speculated that internal disagreements over process and oversight had emerged. And as those whispers grew louder, attention turned toward the people closest to the situation. Fans began asking difficult questions. Was this simply a temporary delay? Or was something more complicated unfolding behind the scenes? Speculation intensified when discussions emerged about permits, approvals, and legal technicalities, areas that can quickly transform even straightforward construction into complex challenges. In situations like this, timing becomes critical. Documentation becomes critical. And decisions made months earlier can suddenly carry unexpected consequences. Some observers believe caution and oversight became necessary. Others believe miscommunication may have allowed uncertainty to grow. What makes the situation especially emotional isn't just the construction itself. It's what the farm represents. For Matt, it represents decades of work, sacrifice, and vision brought to life piece by piece. For Amy, it represents history, chapters of her life that can never be separated from the land. And for Chris, It represents protecting the stability and future of the person he supports most. When all three perspectives intersect, even routine decisions can carry emotional weight. Fans who have followed this journey from the beginning understand how much is at stake. They've watched triumphs. They've watched disagreements. They've watched transitions that reshaped the future of the property. That's why even subtle changes don't go unnoticed. Because Roloff Farms has never been just about buildings. It has always been about people. It has always been about relationships. And now, as uncertainty continues to surround this latest development, fans are watching more closely than ever before, trying to understand what happened, what it means, and what comes next. Because sometimes, the most important turning points aren't the loudest. They're the quiet moments when everything begins to shift. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Construction projects slow down all the time. Weather shifts, materials arrive late, schedules change. Anyone who has ever built something understands that progress rarely follows a perfect, uninterrupted path. But Roloff Farms was never just another construction site. For years, fans had grown accustomed to seeing steady movement, new structures rising, land being shaped and reshaped, Matt Roloff sharing updates, photos, plans, progress. There was always something happening. And then, gradually, that momentum seemed to change. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. Updates became less frequent. Photos showed the same areas, unchanged. Equipment that had once been active appeared still. And the silence began to stand out. Because when something that once moved forward confidently suddenly slows down, people notice. Fans began asking questions. Not out of criticism, but out of concern. Roloff Farms represented decades of work, decades of vision, decades of persistence. Watching its progress stall, even temporarily, felt unfamiliar. Especially when transparency had always been part of the journey. Matt had built a reputation for sharing both victories and challenges. He allowed viewers into the process, into the setbacks, into the rebuilding. But now, there was less clarity, less explanation, less reassurance. And in that absence of information, speculation began to grow. Some fans wondered if the delays were simply logistical. Others questioned whether something more formal was happening behind the scenes. Because large-scale construction projects often involve layers of approval. Permits, reviews, inspections, compliance checks. All routine, all expected, all necessary. But routine procedures can feel very different when they intersect with something deeply personal. Because Roloff Farms was never just a project on paper. It was history. It was memory. It was identity. Every beam, every path, every structure carried emotional weight. And when something so personal becomes subject to outside evaluation, it can feel invasive. Even when it's standard. Even when it's normal. Even when it's required. Fans began discussing the possibility that inspectors had become involved. Not because of wrongdoing. Not because of failure. But because major developments often require oversight. Ensuring safety. Ensuring compliance. Ensuring that everything meets the necessary standards. It's part of protecting the future. But emotionally, it can feel like questioning the past. For someone like Matt, who had spent years building, rebuilding, and protecting Roloff Farms, outside involvement may have carried deeper meaning. Because when you've created something with your own hands, having others step in can feel like losing control. Not permanently, but symbolically. And that's where one phrase began to capture attention. A phrase that wasn't confirmed. A phrase that wasn't documented. But a phrase that fans began repeating quietly. Don't call the inspectors. It wasn't clear where it originated. It wasn't clear who said it. It wasn't clear whether it was literal or emotional. But its meaning resonated. Because it reflected something deeper than procedure. It reflected timing. Because inspections don't just evaluate structures. They interrupt momentum. They pause progress. They force waiting. And when someone is eager to move forward, waiting can feel unbearable. It reflected pride. Because when you've spent years proving what you're capable of building, being evaluated again can feel like starting over. Even when it is. Even when it's simply part of the process. And it reflected something even more complex. History. Because Roloff Farms wasn't just Matt's present. It was also Amy's past. Their shared past. Their shared effort. Their shared dream. And any outside involvement, any official scrutiny, had the potential to reopen emotional layers that had taken years to settle. Not necessarily conflict, but memory. Because places hold stories. And Roloff Farms held many. Fans understood this. They understood that construction wasn't just about wood and land. It was about legacy. About moving forward while honoring what came before. And when progress slowed, when silence replaced updates, when uncertainty replaced clarity, it wasn't just about construction anymore. It became about something deeper. About control. About identity. About protecting something that had taken a lifetime to build. Inspections, in reality, are routine. They ensure safety. They ensure longevity. They ensure that what's being built will last. They protect everyone involved. But emotionally, they can feel like judgment. Even when they are. And that emotional complexity is what made this moment different. Because Roloff Farms wasn't just being developed. It was being watched. Not only by inspectors, but by millions of fans who had followed its story for years. Fans who cared. Fans who hoped. Fans who wanted to see progress continue. Not just physically, but emotionally. The silence left space for imagination. The slowed progress left space for questions. And the phrase, "Don't call the inspectors," became symbolic. Not necessarily of resistance, but of vulnerability. Because sometimes, when you've built something that defines your life, the possibility of interruption feels bigger than the interruption itself. And as the days passed, and as updates remained limited, and as questions continued quietly in the background, one reality became clear. This wasn't just about construction anymore. It was about what happens when the past, the present, and the future all meet at the same place. And when that happens, every inspection feels personal. For years, Chris Marek has remained a steady and quiet presence in the background. He was never the loudest voice in the room. Never the one seeking attention. Never the one creating conflict. Instead, he became known for something else entirely. Stability. Patience. Support. Fans of Little People, Big World watched as he built a relationship with Amy Roloff that felt grounded and calm, especially after years of emotional transitions that reshaped the family. Chris never appeared interested in control. He never appeared interested in ownership. He appeared interested in Amy. In her happiness. In her security. In her future. But now, fans believe something has changed. Because this time, Chris didn't just stand beside Amy. He stepped forward. And that single shift has caused a wave of speculation that no one expected. It began quietly. Subtle observations. Subtle questions. Subtle realizations. Fans who had followed the history of Roloff Farms began remembering something important. Something easy to overlook. Something buried in timelines, agreements, and transitions that took place over years, not days. Because ownership transitions are rarely simple. They unfold in stages. They unfold through agreements, through timelines, through procedural steps that don't always end cleanly. And sometimes, those timelines overlap. Sometimes they leave behind openings. Openings that few people notice. Until someone does. Fans began wondering whether there were technical details connected to Amy's original stake in the property. Details that may not have fully disappeared the moment ownership appeared to shift. Details connected to timing, to procedural structure, to the exact sequence of decisions that unfolded when control of the farm changed hands. Because in situations like this, closure isn't always instant. Sometimes there are review periods. Sometimes there are rights that remain active longer than people assume. Sometimes there are moments when past agreements still hold quiet influence over present decisions. And if that were true here, it would mean Amy may not have been as distant from the situation as it appeared. It would mean her connection wasn't just emotional. It may have remained procedural. And Chris, known for his calm and observant nature, may have recognized that. Because Chris has always paid attention. He listens. He observes. He processes quietly. He doesn't react impulsively. He moves carefully, deliberately. And fans now believe he may have understood something others overlooked. Something buried beneath assumptions. Something hidden beneath the belief that everything had already been finalized. Because when construction began accelerating, when development decisions began reshaping the property's future, questions may have emerged. Questions about timing. Questions about authority. Questions about whether every step aligned perfectly with what had been agreed upon in the past. And if even a small procedural gap existed, even a narrow technical opening, it could have created space for Amy to ask questions, to request clarification, to ensure that her past interests were fully respected. And Chris may have been the one to recognize that possibility. Not to create conflict, but to protect, to ensure, to confirm. Because protecting someone doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet awareness. Sometimes it looks like asking the right questions at the right time. Sometimes it looks like stepping forward when no one expects you to. And fans began seeing Chris differently. Not just as Amy's partner. Not just as her husband. But as someone standing firmly beside her interests. Someone ensuring that her voice still mattered. Someone ensuring that her past wasn't erased by present momentum. Because power doesn't always come from control. Sometimes power comes from knowledge. From timing. From understanding the details others overlook. And suddenly, the emotional balance surrounding the farm began to feel different. Because if Amy still had the ability to question developments, if her past ownership still carried procedural weight, then the future of the farm wasn't controlled by one voice alone. It meant multiple voices still mattered. Multiple perspectives still existed. Multiple rights still carried meaning. And Chris wasn't standing silently anymore. He was standing with purpose. Standing with awareness. Standing with resolve. Fans began realizing that his calm presence didn't mean absence. It meant patience. It meant readiness. It meant strength that didn't need attention to exist. And that realization changed everything. Because this wasn't just about property. It wasn't just about construction. It wasn't just about development. It was about protection. It was about legacy. It was about ensuring that Amy's place in the story wasn't quietly rewritten without her knowledge. And Chris, the man who had always stood quietly in the background, may have just stepped into one of the most important roles yet. Not as an observer. Not as a bystander. But as a protector. And fans are now watching more closely than ever. Because when the quietest person in the room steps forward, it usually means something important is at stake. For Matt Roloff, Roloff Farms has never been just land. It has never been just buildings. It has never been just business. It has been his life's work. Every fence line, every structure, every path carved into the soil reflects decades of effort, vision, and personal sacrifice. Long before cameras arrived, before the world came to know the property through little people, big world, Matt was already building something bigger than himself. He was building a legacy. And that is why moments of challenge, especially unexpected ones, carry emotional weight far beyond logistics. Because when your identity becomes intertwined with something you created, any threat to it feels deeply personal. This recent situation, unexpected scrutiny, stalled momentum, and growing uncertainty, may have placed Matt in an emotionally complex position. Not necessarily because of the obstacle itself, but because of what it represents. A loss of control. For someone who has spent decades making decisions, solving problems, and moving forward despite obstacles, suddenly facing resistance, especially resistance tied to past relationships, can feel profoundly unsettling. And what makes this moment even more emotionally layered is the connection to Amy Roloff. Their shared history is inseparable from Roloff Farms itself. They didn't just live there. They built it together. They raised their family there. They shaped its identity side by side. Even after their marriage ended, the emotional ties to the farm never truly disappeared. Because places like that don't exist separately from memory. They carry it. They preserve it. They reflect it. So when new developments intersect with that shared history, emotions can resurface in ways that are difficult to separate from the present. Fans have long observed that Matt approaches challenges with determination. He is known for pushing forward, for adapting, for finding solutions. But this situation may have been different, because this wasn't just about construction timelines or business planning. This was about relationships, history, and perception. Some fans began speculating that Matt may have hoped Amy would avoid escalating tensions. Not necessarily out of conflict, but out of concern. Concern that public attention could slow progress. Concern that delays could disrupt carefully planned timelines. Concern that the farm's future, something he has worked tirelessly to secure, could become uncertain. Because Matt understands something deeply important. Public scrutiny can change everything. Once uncertainty becomes visible, it takes on a life of its own. Questions grow louder. Speculation spreads faster. And control becomes harder to maintain. There is also the emotional reality of feeling challenged by someone who once shared the same dream. Even when both people have moved on. Even when both people have built new lives. The past never fully disappears. It remains present in subtle ways. In decisions. In memories. In emotional responses that surface unexpectedly. For Matt, this moment may have represented more than a logistical obstacle. It may have represented the collision between past and present, between what was and what is now. Because moving forward is never just about building something new. It is also about navigating what came before. Fans who have followed Matt's journey over the years, both on television and beyond, know how much resilience has defined his story. He has faced physical challenges, business challenges, personal challenges, and each time he has responded by continuing to build, continuing to create, continuing to move forward. But resilience does not mean the absence of emotion. It means continuing despite it. Moments like this can bring frustration, not necessarily anger, but frustration born from interruption, from delays that threaten momentum, from uncertainty that interrupts progress. Because when you are focused on building something meaningful, interruption feels like resistance, even when it may simply be part of a larger process. There is also the quiet emotional reality of legacy. Matt has always envisioned the farm as something lasting, something enduring. something that would remain long after the cameras stopped rolling. That vision carries emotional significance. It represents permanence. It represents stability. It represents purpose. So when anything introduces uncertainty into that vision, it naturally creates emotional tension. Not just about the present, but about the future. Because legacy is fragile. It depends on continuity. It depends on stability. It depends on the ability to keep moving forward. Fans have also wondered how Matt processes moments like this privately. Because public perception often shows only part of the story. Behind the scenes, emotions are more complex. There may be moments of reflection, moments of reassessment, moments of quiet determination. Because leaders often carry emotional burdens silently. They absorb uncertainty internally while projecting confidence externally. Not to hide weakness, but to protect stability, to protect vision, to protect the future they are trying to build. This moment also reflects something deeper. The reality that progress is never purely physical. It is emotional. It is relational. It is historical. You cannot separate the future of the farm from the people who shaped its past. And you cannot separate present challenges from past relationships. Because every structure built on that land stands on top of memory. Memory that continues to influence decisions, emotions, and perceptions. For Matt, this situation may represent a test. Not of his ability to build, but of his ability to navigate emotional complexity. To balance vision with patience. To balance determination with understanding. To continue forward while acknowledging the emotional realities surrounding him. Because building something lasting requires more than construction. It requires emotional resilience. It requires clarity. It requires the ability to move forward even when the path becomes uncertain. And perhaps most importantly, this moment reflects the ongoing evolution of Roloff Farms itself. It is no longer just the dream of one chapter. It is the continuation of many chapters. Past, present, and future. Matt stands at the intersection of those chapters now, carrying the weight of what he built, facing the uncertainty of what comes next, and holding on to the belief that the legacy he created will endure. Because for him, Roloff Farms was never just about land. It was about purpose, and purpose is not easily shaken. For Amy, this moment carries a different kind of weight. Not because she was involved in the construction, not because she had control over the decisions being made, but because of what that land represents to her. Because long before the inspections, long before the questions, long before the uncertainty, there was a life she built there. A life that shaped her identity. A life that millions of viewers watched unfold on Little People, Big World. Roloff Farms was not just Matt's dream. It was hers too. She walked those paths. She raised her children there. She celebrated milestones there. And she endured heartbreak there. Every fence, every structure, every corner of that property holds memories she can never erase. Even though she made the difficult decision to walk away. Even though she chose to move forward with her life. Even though she closed that chapter. The emotional connection never fully disappears. Because you can leave a place physically. But emotionally, some part of you always remains. Amy Roloff has worked hard to create a new life. A life defined by peace. A life defined by stability. A life defined by moving forward. Her marriage to Chris Marek represents that new beginning. A relationship built not on the past, but on the future. Chris entered her life during a time of transition. He brought support. He brought patience. He brought balance. He understood that Amy's past would always be part of her story. But he also helped her see that her story was not finished. That new chapters were still waiting to be written. And together, they built something new. Something separate. Something independent. But when unexpected events begin unfolding at Roloff Farms, it naturally creates emotional complexity. Because that land connects multiple timelines of Amy's life. Her past with Matt Roloff, her present with Chris, and her identity as someone who spent decades helping build something meaningful. She may no longer live there. She may no longer have ownership. But the emotional connection remains undeniable. And being caught between those two worlds is not easy. On one side is her past. A past filled with both beautiful memories and painful endings. A past that required strength to walk away from. A past that required courage to leave behind. On the other side is her present. A present defined by stability. Defined by healing. Defined by emotional safety. Chris represents that safety. He represents protection. He represents a partner who stands beside her without hesitation. And when uncertainty arises involving the farm, it doesn't just affect Matt. It indirectly affects Amy too. Because emotional history does not operate on legal ownership. It operates on memory, on experience, on connection. Amy now finds herself in a delicate position. Not because she is responsible for anything happening, but because she is emotionally connected to both sides of the story. She understands what that farm means. She understands what it took to build it. And she understands what it took to walk away from it. That perspective places her in a unique position. One filled with emotional complexity. One filled with quiet reflection. One filled with decisions that may never be spoken publicly. Does she stay silent? Does she distance herself completely? Does she protect her peace by refusing to engage? Or does she acknowledge the emotional weight of what is unfolding? Because silence itself can be powerful. Silence can be a boundary. Silence can be protection. Silence can be closure. Amy has spent years learning how to protect her emotional well-being. She has learned how to separate her past from her present. She has learned how to let go of what she cannot control. And perhaps most importantly, she has learned that closure does not always come from external events. Sometimes closure comes from within. Chris's presence in her life reinforces that stability. He is not connected to the farm through decades of emotional investment. He sees it differently. He sees it as part of Amy's history, not her future. And that perspective allows him to stand firmly beside her, to protect her peace, to protect her boundaries, to ensure that her past does not disrupt the life they've built together. Because Chris understands something deeply important. Amy has already done the hardest part. She already made the decision to walk away. She already faced the emotional weight of leaving behind a place that defined so much of her life. She already chose herself. And that choice required immense strength. Moments like this test those boundaries. They test emotional distance. They test whether the past still holds influence over the present. But Amy is no longer the same person she was during those difficult transitions. She is stronger now, more grounded, more certain of her identity outside the farm, more secure in the life she has created. Whatever happens at Roloff Farms, whatever decisions are made, whatever outcomes unfold, Amy's path remains her own. She is no longer defined by that land. She is no longer responsible for its future. She is no longer tied to its direction. Her story has moved forward. Her life has moved forward. But that doesn't erase the emotional significance of what it once meant. Because Roloff Farms represents more than property. It represents a lifetime. A chapter filled with dreams. A chapter filled with lessons. A chapter filled with growth. And moments like this remind everyone involved. That closure is not always a single moment. Sometimes closure is a process. Sometimes closure is quiet. Sometimes closure is simply choosing peace. And Amy has already made that choice. Zoom out. Because moments like this are never just about a single event. They are about what comes next. They are about the future. They are about the direction of something that has existed for far longer than any single challenge. Roloff Farms has never been just land. It has been a living story. A place where dreams were imagined. A place where those dreams were built. And a place where millions of viewers witness that journey unfold, step by step, year after year. Now, fans are asking the biggest question of all. What does this tension mean for the future of Roloff Farms? Because the farm has always represented progress. It has always represented forward movement. Matt's development plans were never just about construction. They were about evolution. He envisioned expanding the property, improving it, transforming it into something that could continue supporting his future and preserving the legacy he spent decades building. For Matt, progress has always been personal. He has invested his time, his energy, his creativity, his identity. Every structure, every pathway, every project has reflected his determination to keep moving forward. But moments of tension introduce uncertainty. They slow momentum. They create hesitation. And hesitation changes how the future feels. Because when progress pauses, people begin to wonder whether the vision itself might change. Fans have followed Matt's journey long enough to know that he rarely stops dreaming. He rarely stops building. He rarely stops imagining what comes next. But even the strongest vision must sometimes adapt, must sometimes adjust, must sometimes face unexpected obstacles. And when that happens, the future becomes less predictable. Not lost, but undefined. At the same time, Roloff Farms has never belonged to just one person's story. It has been part of an entire family's journey. Amy's connection to the farm runs deep. It was her home, her life, her foundation. For decades, she helped shape its identity. She helped turn it into more than property. She helped turn it into a place filled with memories. Even after moving forward into her own new chapter with Chris, her history with the farm remains permanent. It remains meaningful. It remains emotional. Because you never fully separate from something that helped define your life. Chris, too, has become part of that extended story. His presence represents continuity. A reminder that while the past evolves, it never completely disappears. Fans have watched Amy and Chris build their own life together. They have watched them create new memories beyond the boundaries of the farm. But the farm itself still represents something larger. It represents where everything began. And that emotional connection continues to matter. Even as time moves forward. Even as circumstances change. And this is where the tension becomes bigger than construction. Because it becomes about legacy. Legacy is not just about buildings. It is about meaning. It is about what remains after the moment passes. It is about what endures. For nearly 2 decades, viewers have watched Roloff Farms grow. They have watched the successes. They have watched the struggles. They have watched the family navigate change, heartbreak, and transformation. That kind of history creates investment. Emotional investment. Fans do not see the farm as a distant place. They see it as familiar. They see it as part of their own memories as viewers. Which is why moments of uncertainty create such strong reactions. Because uncertainty threatens stability. It threatens continuity. It threatens the sense that the story will continue the way people expect it to. And fans are divided. Some stand firmly behind Matt's vision. They see him as the builder, the dreamer, the person who turned imagination into reality. They trust his instincts. They trust his determination. They believe he has earned the right to shape the future of the farm however he sees fit. They believe progress requires bold decisions. They believe evolution requires risk. They believe that without change, nothing can grow. To them, Matt represents forward movement. He represents resilience. He represents the willingness to continue building, no matter the obstacles. But others see it differently. They believe transparency matters most. They believe the farm represents more than one person's vision. They believe its legacy belongs to everyone who helped shape it. They believe openness creates trust. They believe clarity creates stability. They believe the emotional history of the farm deserves respect and understanding. To them, the future of Roloff Farms should be guided not just by ambition, but by connection, by communication, by honoring everything that came before. These different perspectives reflect something deeper. They reflect how much the farm matters. Because people do not debate what they do not care about. They do not invest emotionally in something that means nothing. The fact that fans feel strongly, on both sides, proves the farm's impact. It proves its significance. It proves its place in television history and in the hearts of viewers. But perhaps the most important truth is this. This moment does not necessarily represent an ending. It may represent a beginning. Because every lasting story evolves. Every legacy faces turning points. Every dream encounters moments that force reflection. Moments that force decisions. Moments that force growth. Roloff Farms has faced change before. It has faced uncertainty before. And yet, it has remained. It has endured. It has continued forward. This moment may reshape the path. It may redefine certain plans. It may introduce new challenges. But it does not erase the past. It does not erase the meaning. It does not erase the legacy. Instead, it becomes part of the story, part of the ongoing journey. Because the farm has never been defined by one single moment. It has been defined by perseverance, by adaptation, by the willingness to continue, even when the future feels unclear. For Matt, this is another chapter. For Amy and Chris, it is another moment of reflection. For fans, it is another moment of watching closely. Waiting, hopping, wondering, not just what happens next, but what it all means. Because Roloff Farms has always represented more than land. It has represented possibility. And possibility never truly disappears. It simply waits for the next chapter to begin. At its core, this was never just about a technicality. It was never just about permits, inspectors, or legal wording buried deep inside regulations. It was about something far more personal. It was about history. It was about ownership, not just on paper but in the heart. Because Roloff Farms was never simply land. It was a place where a family grew, where children were raised, where dreams were imagined long before cameras ever arrived. And when something carries that much emotional weight, every decision becomes bigger than the moment itself. If Chris truly discovered a legal opening, it doesn't just change a process, it changes the balance. It introduces new questions about authority, about rights, and about who ultimately shapes the future of a place filled with so much shared past. And if Matt truly hoped to avoid outside scrutiny, it reveals something equally powerful, the reality that even after all these years, the foundation beneath Roloff Farms is not just concrete and soil. It's emotion. It's memory. It's unfinished history. Because every chapter this family has faced, every disagreement, every transition, every difficult decision has left its mark. Not always visible, not always spoken, but always present. And yet, through it all, Roloff Farms remains standing. A symbol of resilience. A symbol of change. A symbol of a story that continues to evolve. Fans who have followed this journey from the beginning understand that this was never just about one decision. It was about legacy, about closure, about what happens when the past and the future collide in one deeply personal place. And now, as the dust settles and the questions linger, one truth remains clearer than ever. The Roloff story isn't finished. Not yet. Because some stories don't end when the cameras stop rolling. They continue, quietly, in the choices people make next. And whatever happens from here, Roloff Farms will always represent more than property. It will represent a lifetime, a family, and a legacy still being written. With that said, thank you for watching.